Welcome back. We're here for another episode of New Narratives, and this time we're featuring Dr. Marie Thouin, the founder of Love Insight, a mindful dating and relationship coaching practice where she supports people of all backgrounds and relationship styles in developing vibrant, intentional, and empowered love lives. Marie completed her PhD in the East West Psychology Department at California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, where she conducted seminal research on the topic of compersion, otherwise known as positive empathy, in consensual non-monogamous relationships. Her work on compersion and mindful dating was featured in numerous podcasts and publications, including the Savage Lovecast and ELLE magazine. She believes in the power of intentional love to create a better world. Bree, it is such an honor to have you because you work with other people all day, every day about their love lives. And now we get a chance to talk to you about your own heart and your heart's journey, which I know informs your work and the work that you do with other people. And so this series is really about relating differently, changing the narrative to an internal vantage point instead of an external one, taking back our agency and doing what we can do to really fuel our own unique journey of the heart. And I know that's a practice that you encourage your clients to take up. And so here we are. So glad to have you. I would love to just kick off by asking you the question about your like where are you today in your heart's journey? Like if you could capture it in a couple of sentences, like what's alive for you on your heart today?
Oh, oh my gosh, I love that question so much. Thank you for having me, first of all, and thank you for being such a great collaborator and great, not only work collaborator, but thought collaborator in this field for a few years now. It's just been so lovely to connect. Ah, and yes, of course, I couldn't encourage my clients to have an intentional heart journey if I were not on one myself. And where I am right now on mine is really investigating what love means in my life, like what a commitment to love in all my relationships, not just my romantic relationships, but really like what does love look like in my friendships, in my family relationships, in my work, and in my romantic life. And going to the next level with that. Like I think I've been on what I would call maybe a path of the heart, a path of really exploring love and kindness and love in all its different manifestations. But there's layers to that, like there's times I think in my life journey where I felt like, oh, I got this, like I know what love is now. I feel it. And then invariably there's always those periods where I just realized there's so many blind spots. There's so many barriers to love in my heart. There's so many places where I can't love or don't let myself, or, I just put up a block. And so I think right now is one of those times where I'm evaluating like, well, what are the blocks that I'm putting up, and why, and what are the programs, the inherited beliefs or the inherited defense mechanisms in me that are blocking love now. So that's kind of the phase that I'm in, is just kind of looking at the places where I keep my heart shut.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really beautiful inquiry. And I think just also speaks to the importance of what it is to hold a practice of inquiry. Like, if this question of what gets in the way of me being able to love fully and vibrantly, and that being, an exploration instead of like, I need to get to the answer. It's like that might look different in any moment. And I'm curious about parts of your history, like growing up, that have informed the way you view love. And so, what has informed it and was like something that you want to take with you into your current relational experience? And then also, like, how has it shifted and what might you be leaving behind in this newest expression of yourself?
Yes, thank you. So I had a pretty non-normative background, and I probably have shared with you before. Like my parents didn't want to get married, didn't want to cohabitate as a couple. They were, a romantic couple before they had me, and they decided to procreate. And it was a very intentional decision, and it was a very countercultural decision, given that they were not interested in a normative marriage and a normative nuclear family life. And so I was born into this paradigm of, well, you don't have to follow the tradition. And that was great because I knew I didn't have to follow the tradition. But now I'm kind of unraveling the places where that also conditioned me into a certain um, mode of we are against tradition. This is how we identify, like our little family unit, our little countercultural family unit. We say fuck you to the system. We say fuck you to people who follow the, like the most traveled path. Like there was a sense of us against the rest of the world, and a little bit of a sense of we're better because we're not sheeps. And it's so interesting because I think most people who are unraveling their conditioning, like they grew up with a more traditional background and they're, growing into a more non-normative life. And it's almost like I have a different pathway where I grew up with this very like rah rah, like we're not gonna take your bullshit society, into more of like a wait a second, I feel very isolated from those beliefs. I feel like I love not having to conform and I love having been born into that, but I also realize now that there's so many thought patterns that have been conditioned to that are basically making me like better than or separate from and feeling like I don't belong and I only belong with people who are also super out of the box. And now I'm learning to kind of open my heart bigger and say, like, who cares about the box? I can be inside of it, I can be outside of it. It doesn't freaking matter. And I can love and I can just really open my heart to people in all kinds of situations. And I don't have to see myself as an outsider, as a matter of identity.
Wow, that's really profound. And I just so value you having this lived experience because, like, it's true. I think the majority of folks come from almost that other vantage point, and what you're talking to around the almost like tribalism kind of quality, which you can find in a nuclear family or you can find in a counterculture family. And it's like the part that you're identifying that sounds like it's getting in the way of love is the part that starts to form identity around rebelling for the sake of rebelling rather than like, is this actually my truth, my path? And so as you're in that exploration of like, okay, I'm going to let go of the identification around being counterculture, but also not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like maybe there are ideals in there that really speak to my heart. And then there are things about um, a more traditional paradigm that also speak to my heart. So I'm curious, like, what that looks like for you now. And it also, just to name, like, it sounds like it's less about the structures generally, and it's really more about, like, you're talking about this kind of quality of the heart that's able to meet any structure or configuration that you choose to enter into with an open hearted approach.
Right, exactly, exactly. And I have been in a heterosexual marriage for the last 8 years, or I mean, maybe more like five, but I've been with the same person for 8 years now. And it's been interesting to kind of juxtapose that identity piece of like, well, like I need to do everything countercultural, and also like, well, I actually want to build a long-term relationship with someone and I want to cohabitate and I want to create a firmer commitment. And it's been kind of a trip, like watching my identity just in a way like expand itself to accommodate something that I had always identified as like, well, this cannot be me. And not just my identity, but actually my heart, and be able to love in that container. And of course, like it's not like everything is super traditional, like I'm not a traditional person, and we are kind of an out of the box couple in so many ways. But I think I've had to find that deeper layer of freedom to not just, like you said, like throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, like, well, I can't I can't love if I'm in this kind of container. And yeah, it's a trip, Alexandra.
Yeah, I totally hear you. Well, I mean, it really takes this notion of intentionality right into the fore because it sounds like it's almost a forcing mechanism to make very specific choices rather
Mm-hmm.
than inheriting a framework in either direction, inheriting the
Mm-hmm.
framework of anarchy, like we're not doing any structure or we're going to
Yeah.
just rebel against the structures that are here.
Mm-hmm.
And here's all the kind of traditional ways that, let's call it monogamy or hetero relationships provide a certain scaffolding in order to kind of create an established sense of security when if the structures fall away then the bond itself may or may not actually be securely attached, and so it's kind of this illusion, I think, that the structure creates the security. It's actually the attachment bond and how you work
Mm-hmm.
in the relationship that creates the security. So I'm curious about a couple of things, like what sorts of choices have you had to intentionally make with the partnership that you are in now and the partnership that you're exploring and basically the way you're in relationship? Like, where have you made intentional choices along the way?
Beautiful. Well, one was to stick it out beyond the honeymoon. And, I'm 39 years old. I have some relationship experience, but not like this is definitely my longest relationship. And prior to that, I was always the kind of person who would leave after 2 years. After the honeymoon is over, after it stops feeling perfect, after it stops feeling just hot and magical all the time, I would just be like, okay, well, this has run its course. And I'm a free person. I don't need to stick it out if I'm not feeling it completely. And so one of the choice points in my growth in relationship to partnership has been to say like, well, what comes after that, 2 year honeymoon? What are the next layer of love that I can explore there? If I'm with the right person, which, with my partner, it's been great because we keep unveiling different layers. And there are moments though where I'm like, well, I don't feel connected like I think I should to a partner. And it's very much like planets and, comets orbiting against each other. Like they're not always at the same distance. And sometimes you might feel, like further away, and sometimes you feel real close. And I've had to learn to navigate those fluctuations without freaking out, without either going into like, oh my God, I'm feeling rejected right now because I don't feel this strong connection, or I'm feeling so detached that I would be kind of in my avoidant self and saying like, well, this is not this is not juicy enough right now. And then kind of it's a little bit like a spiritual path also. I think on my path as a person in life, like there are those times that are very intense and they're very like full of growth and catharsis. And then there's other times where it doesn't feel like that. It just feels like, my gosh, like things are not changing fast enough. And I like intensity. So I have to train myself to not get stuck in a story that when things are not like just changing all the time, that I'm not growing, because that's not true. Like there are those periods of just integration and things happening behind the scenes, and patience has been a big learning curve for me.
It's really beautiful. And just hearing you kind of in the process of leaning in and turning towards and staying with, I'm curious about like, and you mentioned kind of the spiritual practice element or how it's similar to that. Like, what values or principles are grounding you as you make these choices? And like, what would you say it is that you are orienting around, if there's such a thing? Like, what is the thing that's guiding the choices to either lean in or lean out in any given moment in your relationship?
Hmm. Well, one is intuition. I think I've always had a really strong connection to my intuition. And I remember the day when I decided, like, I want to play at a deeper level with someone. Like, I had really thrived on a breadth of connection. how do you pronounce that word? Breadth.
Breath. Yeah, you got it.
Like a
Breath.
lot of different connections and a lot of variety and a lot of change. And I just had this intuition that my next growth edge was going to be about depth. And so I think that recognition that, my growth edge was different has really guided me in those moments of like, no, I think there's deeper wells to go down. So let me be patient here and let me actually sit with whatever is happening. And also, I can usually recognize when the uncomfortable moments or even the boredom or the moments where I don't feel like connected and juicy, um, recognizing like what is really happening for me. And usually there are layers of hurt feelings that I can tap into and really recognize and say, like, oh my gosh, I am not feeling connected right now because, oh my gosh, I felt rejected 2 days ago when maybe like he didn't, tell me what I wanted to hear or something like that. And then my heart shuts down. And all of a sudden, I'm like, well, I'm not really that interested in you right now. And
Yeah.
really tracing back, like, when is it and why is it that I shut my heart and feel, those moments of boredom or annoyance? And can I actually recognize that and say, like, oh, wow, how do I choose love in this moment? How do I
Absolutely.
open my heart? How do I come forward with, the thing that I want to share rather than, being pouty and waiting for it to just like come in the perfect package?
Yeah. So, like, instead of being like, okay, this isn't working for me anymore, like going into those moments of difficulty or pain and tending to the heart and using that as an opportunity to actually get closer and to choose to lean in. One of my teachers, Mickey Keshtan, she talks about naming impact as regularly as possible. And I think one of the things I've discovered in my own relationship journey, which you made me think of, is that practice of consistently naming impact, but not in a way that puts it the blame on them, but takes full self responsibility of the impact, but just to be known in the impact and gives that opportunity for more connection, like you're talking about. So, yeah, just really appreciating that self awareness and willingness to lean into where it hurts rather than like shying away and, letting it go.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I think that's really profound. And what has that shown you in terms of like what has that opened for you in your bond with your partner?
Mm, just a lot more acceptance, a lot more trust, a lot more recognition that we're not out to get each other. Even when, there are those moments of conflict, like it doesn't, like we both really, really want to be loved and seen. And it's so common for couples to feel unseen or unrecognized by the other person. And, I see that in my coaching practice too. Like it's just so, so, so common. And it only takes one person typically to just get out of their orbit of hurt feelings and actually like reach out and drop their ego and be like, hey, no, I really do love you. And, like just to be vulnerable in those moments. And usually the other one follows. So it kind of showed me the magic of of the power of dropping my ego, and how hard it is in the moment, but also how freaking magical. And just, yeah, it deepens the bond.
It's really beautiful. I'm thinking about, I mean, that sounds like a practice in and of itself, is like making contact with the difficulty or the part of the self that feels contracted, wanting to lean in, turning towards. I know you write a lot, both for your blog and your newsletters, but I'm curious, like, what other practices have been supportive for you to develop both like self awareness and relational awareness so that you are taking ownership and are able to kind of navigate your own unique heart journey the way you have been able to? What has been supportive for you?
Mm. Well, I work with a coach as well. I don't know how anyone, like can be a coach or really be on this earth journey without, those kinds of close relationships where we get to be um, held and we get to have a good mirror of who we are. So that's been really instrumental for me to have my own uh, support system and guidance. And also, really looking at my relationships in general, and really looking at what is happening for me and having that be a practice. Just, I consider it a lifelong practice. Like I'm constantly looking at how do I feel about my friendships? How do I feel about my colleagues? How do I feel about, my relationships with my coaching clients too? Like there's every relationship, gives me a lot of information about how I operate and how much or how little, am I willing to show up fully and in the present moment and in integrity. So, yeah, I don't have a sitting meditation practice or really like any kind of regular, you know, ritual around it, but I just kind of use everything that happens as my practice.
Like seeing all of life and every interaction you have and every opportunity to navigate your emotions as a almost like a mirror or a gateway into the transformation that's possible. Yeah,
Mm-hmm,
I mean,
mm-hmm.
that's really powerful. So, in terms of where you are now, I know you're practicing deeply with this question around love. What else is front and center for you? What else are you really like? What is alive? What does your soul want to experience? What are you turning towards? What are you hungry for?
Well, another thing that has been really on my mind is competitiveness and how that has been a big theme in my life and a big, like way that I've kept my heart closed. And it's been so enlightening to look also, like to practice looking at my relationships through that lens and like where are, like vibes of competition or, like how has competitiveness like been preventing me from just showing up, even deeper with people in all different realms. So that's been a great study for me. And I just can already see, like, oh, yeah, there's much deeper levels of friendships and connections that are available to me if I just really see that part. And I don't need to be afraid of it, but I can kind of heal it and create space around it. So that's been a big theme. And, it's of course a big theme in my work on compersion. I've been, writing a book based on my PhD dissertation on basically the opposite of jealousy and competitiveness, sharing someone else's happiness. And of course, when we do research on any topic, it's not separate from who we are and our spiritual path. If you asked a lot of psychology researchers, they'll say, like, yeah, like the research is working me. It's not just like you're working the research. And so really practicing that in my life and all my relationships, whether it's intimate relationships or friendships, it's super powerful.
And one of the things I've always appreciated about you is like your willingness to be so vulnerable and real about the things you're like meeting within yourself, things that you're like, oh, instead of like seeing this as a problem, really getting deeply curious and investigating, how does this show up? And how is this impacting my relationships? How is this impacting the way I want to be close and feel close? And so I just really appreciate that you're doing that so actively with this like strong investigative lens. And what do you think like allows you to really look at yourself like that? Like it sounds like you're holding yourself. I hear the care and I see the courage that it takes to really hold up the mirror and be like, these are ways I'm competitive in relationships. These are ways I close my heart. Like these aren't easy things to look at. And so I know you said the support of a mentor, but also like, what do you think gives you the ground and supports you to really like hold the mirror up? Like what's fueling that?
Mm, gosh, that is such a good question. Yeah, and I will say like I don't typically talk about these things, very publicly, but you have such a way to bring the truth out, and thank you for, inviting that vulnerability. Um Well, I mean, first, I think I always felt a level of, like intense curiosity. And, like people who are into astrology, they would be like, oh, yeah, you're a Scorpio. I am a Scorpio, and I don't practice astrology super strongly, but I identify with those qualities of always needing depth and needing to seek the truth about things. Like I remember even as a small child, wanting to spend a lot of time alone to reflect on my emotions and reflect on what was not positive in my life. And, like my dad being like, why do you do that? Why in the world would you want to do that? You could have an easy life, Marie. And I was like, no, I need to reflect on the darkness.
Oh, I love that. I really share that with you, this kind of like deep thirst for truth. And I feel like a lot of the folks that I'm really close with also share that. And you know, I have my own perspective on this, but I wonder, like, as you hold this, notion of truth and like tapping into it, how do you know when you've like hit the gold mine, or how do you know when that like there's a
Mm.
sense of truth in you that you're like, okay, I'm now satisfied. I can like let this be. Like, what is that like?
Mhm. It's like the combination of like a deep vulnerability, and usually it's kind of intense and scary and emotional, but there's also a relief aspect to it. It's like, oh, fuck. Oh no, like I saw it. Okay, now I know that I saw it because and I mean, I'm talking about like the more like the not glorious parts of me, like, oh fuck, I do think there is a part of me that thinks I'm better than other people. Or, oh, there is a part of me that's just totally competitive and totally jealous. Like, oh fuck. Get to that place of it's not glamorous, but it's true. There
Yeah.
is a relief that comes with it. It's like finally I don't have to pretend that I'm not those things. And now
Yes.
it's like, gosh, I'm not, I wish I didn't have all these things for sure. Like, but, um, but now I get to move on with more information.
Mm. Yeah, I really, that speaks to my own heart, and I feel like you're pointing to this kind of like liberative quality and truth that's like, oh, I don't have to wear a mask and like hope that other people don't notice that I'm competitive, because I know I'm competitive and I still love myself, and like we're just going to go on and I'm going to work with it and I'm going to own it and I'm going to alchemize it. And like when, and also I think that there's this fine line between like taking on the forever self-help project, which it doesn't sound like you're doing. And it's more like really getting curious so that you can live into the heart more fully and like have that experience of deep intimacy and deep connection that like it sounds like you're craving and wanting and like need. And I mean, just given like the line of work you've chosen and
Mm-hmm.
everything, what you're
Yes.
investigating with your PhD and your research and your book, like
Mm-hmm.
it's all about like what's it, how do we get whatever is not the heart out of the way so that we can have more love, like more connection, more love. So
Right, right. And it's not about, uh, like self-villainizing and saying like, oh, I'm bad, I'm bad, I'm bad because I'm all these things. But it's like when you see those things, you can see what's behind them, which, in my case, it's just that very deep fear of rejection. It's like if there is a part of me that's competitive, it's just this very ancient program of like, I don't want to lose. I don't want to be left alone. I don't want to be a loser. Like there's always like that wound behind the scenes that you can actually sit with and be like, okay, I got this, like I'm just gonna love myself through this. I'm just gonna, like be gentle, but also, show up in a way where I have more responsibility. And yes, it's a lifelong project. I don't expect I'll ever stop growing, but um, but I don't have to see myself as a villain until I'm perfect, because I don't think I'll ever be perfect. It's just like I can love myself through those ups and downs of self-discovery, and that gives me the kind of empathy I need to work with people as well who have those very common patterns and wounds. And I don't have to freak out when I see that in others because I'm like, oh yeah, I have that too. We're all trying to heal together here.
Yeah, like not, yeah, exactly. And you walking the walk gives you insight about how the human psyche, heart, mind works. And then you can be a source of like example, but also like peace for other people who recognize, like, oh, yeah, even my coach is vulnerable and imperfect. And that means I can be too. And like just
Mhm.
having that, yeah, the courage to really stand in the truth of like, I'm imperfect and also perfect, like at the same time. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We can still have fun and enjoy life, you know?
exactly. Yeah. So we're coming up on our time here. I always like to close with this question around like one piece of wisdom that's either really shaped you or that has come out of your own practice and like process that you feel moved to share with others. Like what's something that's
Mm.
really alive for you to leave with our listeners?
Well, gosh, there's so many nuggets. I would say, I think focusing on the journey rather than the destination. And, you and me talk about that in terms of dating all the time, like practicing dating as not a means to an end, but actually really being present with the process and how we connect with other people. And that is so true, not just for dating, but I think with long-term relationships. I'm learning that there is a sense of almost like there's a trap there that I'm trying not to fall into, and it's that sense of arrival of like, okay, I have the relationship, it's all good, I don't have to be super present anymore with this person because I know who they are and I know who we are. And so I think the practice of dating in the present moment really translates into the practice of being in a relationship in the present moment and discovering the person or the persons anew. And
Mm.
so that would be my piece of wisdom that I'm, trying to constantly embody is not take for granted like, oh, I know anyone. Like, no, we're always fresh. We're always discovering who we are and who the other person is in real time.
That's really beautiful and like really, really resonates because I think this notion of I know who you are and I know who we are, what you said so beautifully, like keeps us actually stuck in the past or even in our projections about what something is. And that curiosity that we've been talking about that you embody so deeply like makes so much room for change and evolution and aliveness and like deep presence, which I think is ultimately the a prerequisite for actual intimacy. And I think whether you're doing that in dating or in a partnership or like honestly with friends, like friends that you've had for a long time or family, I think it's hardest to do with family, the people that there's some false sense of security in thinking, oh, I know you, like I know this person.
Mhm.
And being willing to like put down our ideas about what we think we know to really meet the person, like there's a lot of freedom in that and there's also a lot of love in that and a lot of closeness in that. So I really love what you
Mm,
said. Yeah.
thank you so much. Oh, that was
Oh,
so lovely.
yes, thank you so much. So Marie, how can people find you? And I'm going to put all of the links in in the show notes as well. But please
Mm.
give us a little glimpse into what you have coming up, anything that you want to share in terms of where people can find you.
Right. So my Instagram is at love_insight_dating, or you can just find me by name. I have two websites, one that's more focused on coaching, which is loveinsight-dating.com, and one that's more focused on compersion. And you can download my research and my dissertation and my podcasts there. And it's whatiscompersion.com. So all these places are great. And I do offer a free 30-minute introductory session for anyone who's interested in coaching with me. And I work with folks who are at any point on their relationship journey, whether you're single or in partnership or partnerships, if you're non-monogamous, and again, across the spectrum of monogamy to non-monogamy. Like sometimes I have people ask me, like, "Hey, you're a non-monogamy researcher. Like, can you work with me? I want to be monogamous. And I'm like, yes. Like, I don't care if you want to be monogamous. I just want you to do it from a place of intentionality rather than default. So, yes.
Which brings us back to exactly where we started around your initial journey of like, it's not about the container you choose, it's how you approach that and how it gets informed along the way. So
Exactly.
yes, amazing. Oh, I know how wonderful you are to work with because we've been
Oh.
collaborating for years now. Just finished up our mindful dating 101, which we have our last session tomorrow night. um, and yeah, so thank you again for coming on, Marie, and such a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Alexandra. It's always a pleasure to chat.